Hi, I'll be reading my own private Grinch. Sorry about we gave a moose a muffin. It was Christmas in Whoville, and all through the village the stores were frenzied with stockpiles to pillage. The shops were all decked out in festive attire, with snowflakes and garlands suspended by wire. Each clerk did their work, keeping smiles in their places, with holiday stressors untouched on their faces. They rang out their welcome, embracing of wallets for this'em-a-baubles and that'em-a-callets. The square had its share of events for all ages, with reindeer on rooftops and skaters on stages. The ice sculptors sculpted, the carolers caroled, and kids threw their snowballs at poor Uncle Harold. And one place in town you could spend half the winter was Mark's Mega Market, your superstore center, with doors opened wide for the masses to enter, though getting back out was a bit of a splinter. Its grocery counters were filled to capacity, taking and caking for baking tenacity, mounds of Who briskets and mountains of sauces, and leaflets of lettuce for salady tosses. Who pudding, Who dressing, Who cider, you're on, stacked pies to the skies filled with peach and pecan. The feast, oh the feast, how the Whos love to feast, stuff their bellies with jellies of flour and yeast. From the west to the north and the south to the east, all the Whos would be feasting till tummies increased.
And off in the distance, a jovial Who, little Cindy Lou who is now 22, had the plate full of cookies she baked every year for a friend of the Whos who she held very dear. She tapped on his door with no hint of a warning and called to the Grinch with a chirpy,
"Good morning."
She heard a low shuffle of clothes and a spin, and a few moments later the door opened in. He stood there bedecked in his outfit of yore, that red Santa jacket he'd worn long before. The rim and the hem at the bottom he'd laced with a billowy cotton that covered his waist. She smiled when she saw him, the funny old Grinch, and she leaned in to give him a Christmassy clinch, and although he returned it not pausing to flinch, he seemed to retreat, maybe just for an inch. But no matter, the Grinch had his own way of being. Today was a day full of sledding and skiing, but first Cindy Lou Who had something to do.
"I brought you some cookies. I made them for you."
The Grinch took one look at the delicatessen, his semblance in icing of azure and crescent, a dozen or so little Grinchy surprises with smiles on their faces and gleams in their eyeses.
"My dear,"
said the Grinch,
"you're so thoughtful and kind. I'm touched by your presence. Now, if you don't mind, there's a spot on the table to lay the tray down. Then we'll hop in my sled and we'll glide into town."
"But, Grinch,"
Cindy giggled,
"they're warm and they're fresh. The dough and the icing, they perfectly mesh. So why don't you try one before we go out? I'm sure that you'll like them. I've nary a doubt."
The Grinch felt unease with the leering dessert, but his friend was aglow and had feelings to hurt. So he said,
"Don't you see, I've been stuffed on a Who tater. I'll work off that meal, and I'll save them for later."
Who tater, thought Cindy. That seemed rather odd, for this climate was hardly conducive to sod, and his claim of its stock through his foregone seclusion was giving the Who a slight touch of confusion. See, Cindy was young and a little naive. It was still in her nature to trust and believe, but her time with the Grinch made her just a bit wise. She noticed a glimmer of pain in his eyes.
"Dear Grinch,"
said the girl,
"is there something the matter? You seem disenchanted by sight of the platter. Or have I been rude with the frosting I smatter? I meant no offense by your likeness and batter."
"No, child,"
said the Grinch.
"You've impeccable skill, and I'm sorry my words have provoked an ill will, so I'm happy to try your green cookies and cream."
He grinned, and he laughed, and he stifled a scream. He lifted a pastry right up to his lips with its gooey confection and nectarous drips. The fragrant aroma infected his snout, but his jaw was determined to keep the thing out. He grinded his teeth at his troublesome stall and decided a taste wouldn't harm him at all. So simple, one bite, take the treat in and swallow. But try though he might, his mouth just wouldn't follow. He set down the cookie, this cast of himself, and he lowered his head and he leaned on the shelf, and he slumped in his chair at a rickety slant, and he whispered to Cindy,
"I'm sorry. I can't."
"You can't?"
Cindy said as she reached for his hand, and she patted his fingers like combing through sand.
"Please tell me,"
she said with the kindness of youth,
"the reason you waver. Please tell me the truth."
The Grinch drew a breath like the heat of a griddle and lifted the jacket that shielded his middle and showed her his belly of fuzzy acclaim, and he grimaced and scowled and he grumbled in shame.
This stomach I carry, this pitiful waste, I cringe when I see it. This thing is disgraced. I feel like a walrus with blubber to spare, like it's building up here and it's storing up there. And I've tried to get rid of it. Surely I've tried. I've tried and I've tried and I've broke down and cried. And I stay here not eating. I curl up and hide and I bottle it up and I keep it inside.
Now, his tummy was round, but was really just fine. You'd not think such a thing could provoke this malign. But whatever the reason, his age or his stress, a feeling's a feeling they need to address. They sat there in silence, the Grinch and the Who, with neither one sure of what either should do. But Cindy leaned in with an empathy's grace, and she gave him a kiss on the side of his face.
Is it possible, Grinch, that the shape of your gain is a subtle illusion from some other pain, and it feels like a burden you're destined to halt, but it might not be swollen, or be there at all?
That doesn't make sense. I should see what I see. And the me that I see is the girth of a tree.
Sweet Grinch, what you're seeing,
The little Who said.
is anxiety speaking. It's all in your head. The sphere of the size of your abdomen's border, it sounds like it's body dysmorphic disorder.
Body dysmorphic disorder, what's that? Is it cause and effect for the unwanted fat?
It's more like a filter that colors your mind by creating a flaw where there's not one to find. I know this because I have friends in the town, and each has a notion they drown in their gown. My cousin Cherie has this whimsy opaque and a dream of perfection she's trying to shake. And Ronald has talent demanding of stock that makes him a target for hecklers to mock. And then there's Melissa, whose pain as a child was to lose her regard when emotions were riled. And those memories cluster and natter their toll, and it's sad, but rejection gives guise of control. You're hearing a monster that feeds on its prey, and it's cruel and collected and won't go away. But you're never alone. There are others below, and they gather together to learn and to grow. And imagine that moment if in from the snow came the Grinch with a struggle he'd like them to know. That they reap what you reap, and they sow what you sow. And they'll listen and hear you and comfort and cheer you and guide you and steer you whenever you're low. For a chance to connect is a gift you bestow. If you give them a shot, oh, their faces will glow.
He ruffled the cotton from out of his lap, and he hugged Cindy tightly and balanced his cap. From Whoville below rang a gentle inviter where Christmas, somehow, felt a little bit brighter.